sometimes, when you don't like a government's policy, you're like, well, I wouldn't have done it that way because your ideology sucks, quite frankly, which is, the way I feel about most left-wingery. But then there's other stuff, and you just go, who of any colour rosette thinks this is appropriate? I mean, what sort of lobotomy do you have to have had to not just give away critically important islands, they're your islands, your territory, to another country who's got a really close relationship with a hostile state, but then pay them to take them? Let's speak to Robert Midgley, Head of Communications, Friends of the British Overseas Territories. Robert, is there any way, shape or form that you can help me make sense of this? Because my understanding is this ICJ ruling was non-binding, so we probably could have just ignored it. It was sort of written in the words of wokery. There was even a Chinese judge sitting on that committee who was a big fan of Russia invading Ukraine. And we've just gone, all right, here you go. We better do what it says then, even though it was just advice. And then we've ended up paying an arm and a leg, up to £30 billion. I think that will probably swell to much higher than that. And even in this deal, there's a clause in it that says we've got to notify Mauritius if we're doing any sort of military things coming from the islands. It's like, that's the point of having really critically secure infrastructure and a military base in the middle of the ocean. So you're not telling anybody what you're up to.
Look, Alex, you've just summed it up really well there. And, I think it's the definition of insanity. The whole deal is absolutely insane. Diego Garcia is a guarantor of Western security. And now we have to go to a third country that's, over 3,000 kilometers away, just to ask them if we can take a plane up into the air. It's absolutely insane. But I mean, yesterday, what we saw was a real sort of David and Goliath moment. You had one Chagosian standing up in the High Court, delaying the whole thing based on human rights grounds. I mean, for the past year or so, Chagosians have been sidelined, they've been ignored, they've had all these pointless, meaningful conversations with the government where notes weren't even taken or implemented in the deal. But most of the Chagosians are firmly on the side of it remaining British. And, the government have ignored them to the point, and actually they've snuck up on them in the last moment and delayed the whole thing, which was absolutely phenomenal to be in. I was really, really pleased to be out there with them yesterday, to stand alongside and make sure they get the media attention that they deserve. They absolutely deserve to be heard and just recognised for who they are. They are British Chagosians who want the Chagos Islands to remain British. They want to go back there into the outer islands. They understand the security concerns. And, much like in Cyprus with Akrotiri and Deucalion, Ascension Island, they've got civilian populations that live on side by side with military installations. Same with Gibraltar, same with Falkland Islands. They've made it work. And I should say that back in 2012, there was a KPMG feasibility survey that was done on the Chagos Islands, and they created 5 options that looked at bringing Chagosians back into the outer islands. And it worked. The UK would have to take a lot of responsibility and put some money into it, but it's a hell of a lot less of money that we're about to spend now. And, they should have done that. I don't know what happened to that feasibility study. It just faded away, but it made absolute sense. And why we didn't go through that is beyond any recognition, because we've essentially turned our backs on self-determination.
Yeah.
Yesterday, turning our back on self-determination, you saw that single Chagosian get absolutely shot down in the courts. And then at the same time, you had places like Gibraltar and the Falklands, standing up and be like, what the hell is going on here?
Right, is it going to be us next? I've got to ask you something. You used to work in the Foreign Office, didn't you, Robert? So I hope you might be well placed to answer this. I got 2 questions. Number one is, once this is done, and it basically is done, it's stitched up now, can it ever be reversed? I'm guessing it can't. And number 2, and I always ask this of people because I just don't know the answer, even though this wasn't actually a binding piece of international law, even if it was, what happens when you break international law? I mean, what actually happens if you go, nah, we're not going to do that?
Okay, so there's 2 things there. Firstly, once the deal is signed, it's very hard to reverse because that's essentially made it binding. Secondly, that it's you can't go back onto it. And if we ignored it, the thing was, the ICJ, the original ruling, the ICJ shouldn't be making sovereignty rulings anyway. Not to mention, they can't do anything binding between two Commonwealth nations. It's actually a restriction with the ICJ that they just can't make two Commonwealth nations do a sovereignty agreement with each other. So we could have completely ignored that if there's just never any need for us to go into detail. And what I should say is that there's something that's happened behind the scenes that's made the US say, yes, we need to do this.
Yeah, what is that?
What has been said, no one has been questioning what has been said, but it's so essential that even the US turned around and said, we need to do that. And I saw Keir Starmer's press conference yesterday, and he said there's something at critical national, secret and policy. Well, what is it then? Because you're giving away all this money, you're giving away sovereignty, you're turning back on self-determination. So what is this essential piece of information? Because I've seen all the essential pieces of information, and nothing in these texts tell me that we should be giving away our own territory at cost. It just doesn't make sense.
I've never understood why the Americans kind of caved to this, because I'm like, surely it's not in your interest unless they kind of think that actually the Chagos Islands being given to Mauritius and sort of coaxing the Chinese in to start sniffing around actually helps us sniff around in reverse or something.
Alex,
I can't make sense of it.
We've been accused now of being aligned with Russia and China.
Right.
Russia and China, being no doubt, do not want this to go ahead. They've been putting spy software in fishing trawlers docking up in Diego Garcia for God knows how long. The FCDO have been keeping it all quiet. They've been bugging these negotiations. You found the previous Prime Minister of Mauritius with bags of cash and UK visas. This serious dodgy stuff that's been going on. And like you said earlier, the UN has been filled with Chinese lawyers and Chinese diplomats. The whole thing has stank from the off. And not to mention that Keir Starmer had his own trip to Mauritius paid for by the Mauritian government to convince him to hand it over before he became Prime Minister. The whole thing, Alex, absolutely stinks. And then for them to turn around to us, who want to protect British sovereignty, and say, actually, no, you're in league with Russia and China, along with the Chagosians. You know how offended we are, and the Chagosians feel betrayed by all of this for wanting to protect British interests.
Do you know, that was like boom, 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 truth bombs all over the place. I just need to process this in my head. So these talks were all infiltrated, being bugged, being twisted by China and Russia. And then...
May I just add one more thing?
Yeah.
So just on the run-up to the Mauritian election, they shut down social media for a few weeks because people were talking about these leaks, because all these damaging things were coming out from the Prime Minister's office, not just about Chagos negotiations, but about more sensitive things. And what Mauritius did was shut down all of their social media for a few weeks. What sort of free-speaking society is this that we've dealt with? Not to mention, they've been locking up British Chagosians for speaking out about it in Mauritius too. They've been fleeing Mauritius to come here for safety.
That is absolutely crazy. And why is nobody talking about the point you just made, which I didn't even know about? That Stalin, so I always do that, old Sir Keir Stalin, I can't help it, slip of the tongue, had an all-expenses paid trip to Mauritius before he became Prime Minister. I mean, that is really, really dodgy.
The whole thing absolutely stinks. I mean, putting aside that his best friends were the lawyers, being paid up by Mauritius to start with, the whole thing absolutely has stank from the off. And, it's just continues to get worse. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the documents, but it talks about decolonization. It smells of, imperial guilt. Mauritius has never owned or held sovereignty over the Chagos Islands.
It's not even close to them. That's what I don't get. It's not even in the same ballpark.
Just to rewind, we actually got the Chagos Islands as a reward from the Battle of Waterloo. When Napoleon was defeated under the Treaty of Paris, we were ceded the Chagos Islands, and then Mauritius came afterwards 2 years later.
Oh, do you know, Robert, thank you so much for everything that you have done to bring that 11th hour legal injunction, helping the Chagosians speak up for themselves, and the protests that you guys have helped them to organise. It's a crying shame we didn't get a longer delay, so at least we could try and have some sort of democratic chat about it all. But, oh my gosh, some of the bits of information Robert just dropped then. That stuff should be the front of every single newspaper in the land.